all join us this evening. It's going to be an incredible evening. Welcome, welcome, welcome. On behalf of the Absalom Jones Episcopal Center for Racial Healing, where Dr. Catherine Meeks is our executive director, and my shero, I may add, we welcome you to a wonderful evening because I have been focused, you all, on this book, and it's been incredible. Welcome to Staying Sober While Living in a Drunk World. Conversations on navigating the contradictions of life. And so my name is Dominique Hardy, and I am the program manager for the Center for Racial Healing. And wow, there are almost 100 of you already and more coming in. And so in the essence of technology here, if you all don't mind, you all will be muted for most of the session until the question and answer time, where I will unmute you one by one or ask you to unmute yourself. We do ask that during that specific time that you all please keep your questions or comments to a minimum of 1 minute, well, to a maximum of 1 minute, big difference. And so that I don't have to mute you. That would be very unfortunate. And so we thank you all in advance for your cooperation. And does anyone have any questions or issues with their technology? If you do, you can message me here. If you look down at your chat, you will see my name, Dominique Hardy, and you can private message me. If you have any issues, I'll be happy to assist. And then also during the question and answer time, you will see at the bottom of your screen, if you are on a laptop, you'll see a blue hand. And so you can raise your hand if you have questions. If you don't see that, no problem. You can just put the word "me" in the chat at the appropriate time. And so without further ado, I introduce you to my shero, my mentor, the executive director for the Center for Racial Healing, and a woman of great integrity, wisdom, a life well lived, and much more to live. And just someone who is very valuable to me, and it's such a privilege and an honor to know her and to be able to sit underneath her and glean from her wisdom, Dr. Catherine Meeks.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Is everybody muted now?
Okay, I'm going to mute everyone, and then Dr. Meeks, you can unmute yourself when I mute you.
And unmute Tom, because we need to talk.
Hold on just a moment.
Okay.
Here we go.
Well,
I'm going to unmute you now, Dr. Meeks.
Okay, right here.
Give me just a moment, you all. There you are. You can click on the blue button.
Thank you. Turn you loose with buttons, and you just go all over the place, right? It is great to be with you. Thank you all so much for taking time to come and be with us, and for this session tonight and the two subsequent ones on this topic that I think is so important to the quality of life for all of us, no matter where we happen to be in our journeys. And tonight Tom and I've decided that rather than doing presentations where the presentation always implies that you know a whole lot more than the people in the room with you. When you're in conversation, it implies that you're in it with the folks that are in the room with you. And we wanted this discussion to exemplify the fact that we understand that we're in this with the people in the room with us, and that this is not a topic that we somehow have studied and mastered, and now we can present as if we can stand on the top of the mountain and shout down wisdom, but that we're all in it together, and we're trying to make sense out of a lot of stuff that some make sense and some doesn't. So that is why this is called a conversation. And I know that we're not, because we are Westerners and because we're smart, we're not used to this kind of way of having things done, because we like to listen and take notes and have all this stuff so we feel like we have really done something. But we're inviting you to listen with your heart and to listen as deeply as you can without having to worry so much about being in school, There is no exam afterwards. But the exam will be given to you by your heart, not us, and your soul. And so that to me is a better way to do this particular piece of work that we're trying to do. And I am really delighted to introduce you to my friend. And I'm going to read what I wrote a few weeks ago in thinking about how to do this introduction, because I knew that if I just trusted myself to do it off the top of my head, I wouldn't say exactly what I wanted to say. So I wrote it down. So sometimes in a lifetime, a person is fortunate enough to encounter a person who it seems you have always known. Finally, your paths caught up with one another. You clearly recognize the kinship of spirit, and that is the gift of grace. Tom Brackett is such a kindred spirit, and I am grateful for the opportunity to share a part of this fine pilgrimage as a fellow traveler with him. What an unlikely candidate in some ways, but God and the goddess are always pushing us a few steps beyond the likely to the edges of healing, and I am grateful. And our connection helps to push me to the edges of healing. And I hope it does, that his connection to me does the same thing. And it is a delight to share out of that journey of kind of shared healing. Dominique, you need to fix this because I don't want to be here by myself.
Sure, I'm doing it right now.
So anyway, it's a great honor to be, this is right. This is the best way. So we have decided we've had so many good conversations about this book. And then I laughed about that I wasn't going to remember any of them. And it was too bad that we hadn't recorded them so that you could just play those good conversations, but we didn't. So tonight we will record this conversation. So welcome, Tom.
Thank you, Catherine. I'm honored to be here with you, really, and with this beautiful gathering of wise colleagues and brothers and sisters, siblings from all over. A beautiful gift tonight. It's good to be here.
Yes. And we talked about all different kinds of ways to begin this conversation. The thing about Parker Palmer's The Promise of Paradox is that you could read it over and over and over, and you still wouldn't exactly get all of what he's trying to say or all of the implications of what he's trying to say, even if he's not saying it. So we kind of thought we'd start with what had jumped off the page at us. And I raised that as a way to start. And then Tom had something right away that jumped off the page. And then I couldn't figure out what mine was. And I had 3 pages of what jumped off the page. So I have to pick something. So I want to let you go first, and then I will add mine.
Well, I think you were borrowing from Howard Thurman's description of the ammonia moment, the smelling salts moment. And mine came to me at the beginning of the most recent racial justice pilgrimage orientation, when you, Dr. Meeks, you claimed that we do not have the luxury of choosing one side or another in this fight for racial healing. And that if I thought that I could escape that tension by choosing one side or another, I was sadly mistaken. And that stayed with me really profoundly, really rocked me, kind of pushed me to own my tendency to seek out certainties and find one flat answer to a profound 3-dimensional life experience. But then my access to this book really comes to me through my adult daughter living with autism. And my real introduction to paradox, I would say, has been through the realization that her otherness has made me other as well. So my struggles to honor her while managing the chaos and uncertainty of being her father has called me to a place where embracing the promise of paradox opens me to new ways of being in relationship with the other, those whom we have othered, as well as those who other me. I'll stop there.
Yes. And I'm not going to call you Reverend Brackett, so please don't call me Dr. Meeks.
Okay.
All right. Okay. I know you're being respectful, and everybody uh, needs to do that sometime, but tonight we'll just be the buddies that we are. I think for me, the phrase, the sentence that through paradoxes or the contradictions, we learn that the power for life comes from God and not from us. And I just think that that there's so much energy put into trying to control and trying to create certainty and trying to make sense out of things that you can't make sense out of. And one of the things I've said about this book, the whole book, is that what Parker Palmer has done is he helped me to kind of to language the experience that I was having, because living as a Black woman in America is a paradoxical journey, or else you go crazy, because there's so much stuff that doesn't make sense. And you have to figure out how to put this in some kind of container so that you can make sense out of the life that you're being asked to live. I mean, because you're supposed to be empowered and have a good life, but yet there's a culture that tells you don't belong here. And both of those things are given as truths that you have to somehow work out in your journey. And so it's really helpful to think about that none of that stuff is where the real power for living comes, but that it all comes from God, who is not partial in the way that the culture is, or that anything else is that we have constructed. And that's life-giving. But there's so much more that is also have been ammonia moments for me with this book. I mean, I don't make notes mostly when I'm reading, but I've got all kinds of notes, and my book is so marked up. So.
And I think one of the gifts that you've been to me over the last 7 years is your witnessing my appreciation for waking up. You know that I was raised in a very restrictive, fundamentalist environment, very narrow view. Either this is true or that is true. So in the way that I was raised, if I read Niels Bohr's description of paradox, the opposite of a correct statement is a false statement, but the opposite of a profound truth may be another profound truth. Well, my natural response, given the way I was raised, would be, well, which is it? Which one? Don't say both. That's semantics. If you love the truth, one of those is true. And then coming through healing and breaking open and being a broken, wounded healer in the process of being healed has taught me that we actually need both of those truths at any given moment. So, I mean, at the core, this root paradox Jesus walks around with on the tip of his tongue. If you seek your life, you lose it. But if you if you lose your life, you're going to find it. I think every day in every conversation we have, I'm brought back to that realization.
And none of it makes sense if you can't think about it as having somehow the capacity to hold two things that are equally true without seeing them as contradictions, and to live in that. It does create a kind of dissonance because we're just people who want structure, and we want everything set up in discrete ways so that we can manage it. And I think that what paradox teaches us more than anything is that we can't manage much.
Yes. And that means for me that I need community. So I prefer solitude. I prefer being by myself, and I am in desperate need of being in the wholeness that community has to offer me. So we have all these beautiful examples of paradox in the book, and they've all touched me deeply. And I thought that my way of staying away from regurgitating what I've learned from this profound teacher is to own that my ultimate paradox is that I was raised to be a racist who today I am passionate about healing from racism. And that often the hardest person for me to love is not a person of color, but actually myself. And that once I find that space of receiving the love of God and the love of community, then I, in fact, am on the way toward the healing that allows me to genuinely love those different from me. So I'm in recovery, reclaiming my humanity and bound up in our mutual liberation. I can't do it by myself.
Right. Yeah, somebody said you can't become human by yourself. You can, there are many things you can do by yourself, but becoming human is not one of them. But then what about how we talk about community so much, and we talk about beloved community, which just gets on my nerves a lot of the time, because I don't think people have any idea what they're even talking about. And yet in many of our communities, we try so hard not to embrace paradox. We want to have everything kind of carved out and then restrict people and exclude people if they don't fit into whatever the structure is that we've created, when maybe the diversity of the people coming into the group is a paradox itself, that here all these folks and we're all beautiful and made in God's image and loved by God. I mean, I don't know. I've just thought a lot about how we create the othering process, and because we can't live with paradox. You know, we can't live with somebody, we can't live with somebody not doing whatever the list is that we have decided you have to do so you can be okay. And that impacts so much the quality of community and whether community can even happen in the first place.
I love that. One of your gifts to me, Catherine, shined again tonight when you spoke at the beginning about being grateful to God and Goddess and the Goddess. And it reminds me about your commitment to stand in, Parker calls it, the wideness and the wildness of God through embracing paradox, embracing it, not tolerating it like I barely do, but really embracing this.
Yeah.
And he describes the work you're doing at the center as standing in the tragic gap.
Yeah.
And you've come alongside me many, many times. I think we've done for each other, but yours particularly for me is coming alongside the process of raising a daughter with autism, to embracing my own healing from racism, to working in a religious institution that has a long history that we're still unwrapping, of oppressing people while proclaiming the abundant life. I think these are great examples of what it means to stand alongside all those preceding us who have stood in the tragic gap. And that's exactly how I see the beautiful work that you're doing at the Absalom Jones Center for Racial Healing.
And the problem with that is that it is beautiful, and but one has to become clear about being willing to live in constant dissonance, because it does not leave you, there's always so much dissonance when you can't camp out somewhere, when you know, I have to stop and say to myself, okay, what do I really believe? Because I'm so at ease with paradox, you know. But it's not that there's some things that are absolutely non-negotiables for me, absolutely true for me. But then I know that as soon as I say that there'll be another way to look at that. And it's really important to be able to hold those things in an equitable way. And it creates a dissonance that wouldn't be there if I just could stand, if I were fundamentalist, but I would never be able to be a fundamentalist because my brain doesn't work that way, or God just messed up my soul. I don't know which one it is, but it won't happen. But it's easier. It feels easier to just be able to choose, and you can't. And so the tragic gap standing, I understand why people run from it, because it leaves you living just a little bit like you're in quicksand, a little bit, just a little. But it forces you to trust that underneath the quicksand is the foundation of God, which comes back to my my ammonia moment, that the power, the life comes from God and not from even anything that's external to me. And that to me is, you know, I don't always know that every day, but most of the days I do know that. And it's really important to hold on to that.
And I stand with you in that, as one in recovery, an alcoholic in recovery, while living in a world, sometimes even in a church institution that is still drunk on power and certainty and success and domination and market share. It's that same delicate tension. And it calls me to live in that space, that tragic gap between reality and possibility. For me, the word tragic is relevant in that I often see how things could be, that domestic violence is so unnecessary, the poverty, the disparity between who's getting vaccine and who's not. There's the tragedy that marks that gap between what is currently true and what could be. So there's this whole continuum for me. And it calls me, as, what do you call it? To create brave space. Yeah, calls me to make for myself that brave space, but also to live in the brave space that you and my community are intentionally creating on a daily basis. I couldn't do it without that.
You know, we made a t-shirt at the center called "I Am a Brave Space." So because it is important to make that affirmation beyond just kind of saying it when we make talks or we write something, but how do we make that alive in the world? And to be a brave space for me is to be clear about where life really comes from, and to live a fearless life, to live as fearlessly as you can live in this life. And I think the confronting paradoxical truths helps you to be less fearful, because you understand that you look on one side, you know, as Khalil Gibran says, you look at your joy and you turn it over and you see your sorrow, you know, so that these things are very much in concert with each other. And you don't have to be frightened that the other side of joy is sorrow, because you know you can go back and forth. You know, you don't have to be frightened that the other side of gaining your life is losing your life. I mean, it makes no kind of sense at all if you don't learn how to stand in it and see those two things as being complementary to each other rather than contradictory.
Complementary to each other. I love the story of the Associated Press photographer who was being questioned about an incredible photograph he took of a group of Syrian women and children who had thrown down this amazing tablecloth at that spot in their village that had most recently been bombed in the war over Syrian occupation. And they're surrounded by rubble, still smoking hot, still searching for bodies and remnants of their household goods. They put down a tablecloth, and what they had made in isolation, they brought together into community and invited rescue workers, UN workers, people from the other side, anyone in the village to come sit with them in this big circle where their potluck cooking came together. And somebody asked them, why there? And they said, well, because we found that if you go to the place most recently bombed, the likelihood that it's going to get hit again is greatly reduced. So we've decided to go to the worst place with food that we made by ourselves in fear and hiding, and offer it in community as a way of standing in the middle between our desire for peace and the reality of the war in which we live. And that was a powerful story.
It's so beautiful, and such an affirmation of understanding where life really comes, the power for life really comes from. And also such a statement against fear.
Yes.
Which I think is the most paralyzing emotion that anybody can have. And our country is just covered in a fear blanket these days. And I just, when I hear examples like that, or things that have happened like that, it's so encouraging, because it just keeps affirming that God is the source, and the goddess or the source. And they're never gonna stop being the source. And no matter, whether you're talking about the Holocaust, or you're talking about slavery, or you're talking about genocide against Native peoples, there's always that capacity for that energy, that goddess energy, to break through and have somebody be enlivened to the point of standing up and being courageous. And that's so encouraging to me.
Breaking through reminds me of that incredible description. God broke through and he sent this one to pitch his tent in our tent village and become one of us. I think this incredible retelling of the story has God come among us in the messiness and the paradox of our human existence. And even the promise that it will one day be different, that wasn't even received well in the moment. Jesus puts the scroll down in Luke 4 and he says, "This day has this prophecy been fulfilled in your ears." And they wanted to march him out to the hill and throw him off because it was so absurd. But my friend Marley reminds me constantly of a Starhawk quote, and I hear her whispering it all the time. It starts, "I am a part of an unjust and oppressive system, and therein lies hope for the system." Sometimes all she has to say is, "Therein lies hope for the system." COVID count is going up and I'm in the middle of it, and I wish I could do something, but I'm here offering chaplaincy, standing with people, providing care, and therein lies hope for the system. I pay tax dollars to an oppressive government that's ruined places around the world, and therein lies hope for the system.
Because you participate and resist at the same time.
Yes.
And if you ever start just participating, then you are lost. Because the vocation is to be the vocation of resistor, always, I think. And that is why the system can be looked at as being, there's some hope in it as long as there are resistors in it, as long as if you're not said yes to all of it. And I learned that a long time ago about institutions, that there is no institution that is particularly interested in the people who keep it going, that the institutions are interested in keeping themselves going. And we are just the cogs in their wheel that help that institution to continue. And that is what the real commitment is to. And you don't have to fool around very long to get that reaffirmed for you. But getting that clear and then becoming a subversive resistor and just figuring out how, and it's kind of, when I look back on doing that in higher education, it's kind of fun to think about how I managed to do it. It wasn't that much fun when I was doing it, because it was always a tug of war, and I wasn't even as clear about it as I am now. But it's the same thing with the church, with higher education, with media, it doesn't matter. Whatever is an institution, the institution's commitment is to itself. And when you realize that, but then you're there, and so there's hope for that institution. How about that for paradox?
Yeah. I wrote down something you said in the middle of our conversation a couple of days ago, and I want to share it here because it feels like the invitation that we're offering with this series. And this is how I remember you saying it. We would invite you, and I was thinking about the people who would be, all of you who are joining us tonight. Catherine, you said, we would invite you to listen to your own heart in a different way. We're hoping that you'd be willing to interrogate your own life with this question: am I really doing this work from my best self? Or how might I illumine whatever I already know to help me be ready for new light, new enlightenment, braver practice? And so I think that's where we're headed with these conversations. We're inviting you to try these on, starting right where you are. Your mileage may vary. Your experience will certainly be different, but it's worth it. And we need you, we need each other. And we're glad you're here tonight with us.
And Tom, before we invite others to join us in speaking together. I would just love for you to say a little bit about the passage that sort of inspired the title of this event, this series, from the notion of if you don't choose to stand in that gap space, that the alternatives are to have this irrelevant realism or corrosive cynicism. So,
yes, that was beautiful. Yeah, and you had this amazing story about working with the teens that were so afraid. But I think it's the Parker Palmer's claim that standing in the gap is challenging. Yes, it rocks us to our core, but he says that the alternatives are irresponsible. The alternatives are, one is to fall out on the side of too much reality and into corrosive cynicism that consumes us like a canker. But the other is to fall out on the side of too much possibility and into irrelevant idealism. It's powerful. And then you were describing this incredible interaction you had with the teenager that was carrying a firearm. And we were talking about how that, hoping that people make it home safely may not be relevant if home is the place of their greatest terror. Or saying to the woman recovering from domestic violence, oh no, your life could be wonderful if you would just make great decisions. It's just so inappropriate. So what is it then? To stay in the tragic gap means that we are present to both the current reality and the promise of a different future. Is that what you were talking about?
Yes. And those children who had these guns because they're scared to death. And my standing there believing the world that I can help create a new world doesn't really help them, except for me to keep believing it and refusing to let go of it. It's not going to help this little boy who I just gave $50 for his gun, because he'll probably go get another one because he's scared. But what helps him is that I'm in this system and I won't give up on it. And that, I mean, it's like holding tightly to the hope that I can help make the world better, while living with the realization that this child is living in this fear and anger and rage and angst and may be dead before he's 15 years old. I mean, all of those, both of those things are true and have to be held. And that is what we run from and don't want to do. And that, we get into this being cynical about it is no reason to do anything, or being an irrelevant idealist that, oh, it's all going to be okay. And then you still don't do anything. So you just let yourself off the hook instead of understanding that you have to stand in the pain of it and do what you can and then let go of it, or else you go crazy yourself. So, I mean, I don't know who constructed this way of reality. I would like to speak to them about it a little bit sometimes, because it just seems like, couldn't it have been a little easier to figure all this out and do it? But it is what it is. And I spent a lot of time crying, working with those children and working with mothers who lost their children to violence. I spent a lot of time crying because I knew that I had all this faith and hope and was doing all this work, but for many of them, it was not going to make any difference except as they might encounter people. Well, I don't need to say that so emphatically, because if you encounter somebody who loves you, who cares about you, and who gives you that moment of being seen as a real person and as somebody worthy, I don't know how to say what impact that has. I mean, I think that has some impact. And so I don't want to dismiss it completely, but it's not going to make his external life all that different, not for a good while anyway. Internally, I don't know what happened in their souls. And I just have to, again, trust to be faithful and keep standing in the space and being brave and living with the dissonance and trusting that life comes from God and the goddess,
Yes. A dear friend of mine once remarked at the end of a hard day how she felt such despair that none of the work she had done in that day kept so many children from going to bed hungry that night. And we talked about it a little while. And I heard myself saying, I don't know where it came from, but I heard myself saying, yes, but recently you've planted 10,000 apple trees. And you're going to be gone before they come to full fruit. But the future is going to be different because you are faithful in this moment of standing in the tragic gap.
Yes. And so community, being in community helps us to have the courage to keep standing in the gap, reinforces the sensibleness of it, gives us courage, gives us hope, standing with people that at least who catch some glimpse of who we are, so that we're not just like out on an island by ourselves, I think. And we to all of you who are listening, we promise to talk about this in terms of community, and next week in terms of scarcity and abundance, and then the following week in terms of knowledge. And I just want to I want to highlight that because there's so much to this book, and you could kind of miss a lot without just zeroing in on something. It could take us, we could talk about it for 3 months and still have something left to say. I don't know if Tom and I could talk about it for 3 months, but it could be talked about for 3 months and there would still be a whole lot to say about it. So, and I guess we better stop if we're ever going to invite other people into this conversation. We better do that as we promised, so that we can hear from other folks as well.
Okay. If you all would be so kind as to just simply write the word "me" in the comment section if you'd like to speak, and then we'll call on you so that you can unmute yourself, or feel free to raise your virtual hand.
And can you just put us all back on the screen together?
Sure.
Dominique, where are you?
I am removing.
You disappeared.
Okay, I'm going to put myself on the screen. Do you want me on the screen with you, or would you like to be with everyone else?
Pardon?
Would you like to be unspotlighted?
Just unspotlight us just to let us all be equal.
Okay, sure.
In the conversation.
Okay, I'm going to unspotlight you now. Hold on.
Please do.
Sure. Give me just a moment. There we go. Okay.
Yeah, that's better.
It is done. And while we are waiting on questions, I did see a few. I saw the first one that said, what are the skills that one needs to live in paradox besides trust?
Can you unmute Tom, or can he unmute himself?
I can unmute
himself.
Yep,
okay.
I'm here.
Say the question again.
What are the skills that one needs to live in paradox besides trust? Powerful
You go
question.
first, Tom.
Well, I can only speak from my own experience about this. I think that for me, it's corny, but it was about love. It was about being in close relationship, vulnerable relationship with those whom I love deeply and have come to love deeply. So for example, specifically, to live in the paradox of being othered and yet being, you know, an educated, capable white male in a privileged position in society, to live in the fact that I am othered because I have an other daughter that is very inconvenient in the world, and be present to that and still hold out hope and work in the larger community of differently abled people. It took love. It took love to overcome my own impatience, my own intolerance of the mess, of the stigma. It definitely took love. And I had to come to a place of compassion for myself and all of my own rush and running toward one or the other. I hated that paradox. I fought against it for decades. So it's about love and relationship and being in community that gives me the strength to do this work. My simple answer.
Yeah, so let's go to another question rather than have both of us talk about the same thing.
Okay, sure. And I see you, Ruth Elizabeth. You'll be next after this question. Someone says, and I believe this was answered in the conversation, but I guess they want elaboration. It says, does paradox only apply to spiritual truths, not the facts and events of our daily lives?
Mm.
Well, you know, Howard Thurman says that whatever you find that's in religion, that is supposed to be true, it's not in religion. It's not made true because it's in religion. It's in religion because it's true. And so life is true. You know, I don't split the world up. God made all of it, and God is in charge, for me anyway, most of the time, except when I think I can be in charge myself, and then I get put in my place. So I think that it's important to, you know, to be careful not to get into thinking this nonsense going on about alternative facts and alternative truth. That's a bunch of nonsense. We're talking about people who are really willing to live with looking at two pieces of information and realizing that both of them really can stand the test of being called true. And not just because you like this idea better than that one. That is not what this is about. You know, you don't get to just pick stuff and make it up as you go, which is what is happening a lot in this culture right now. There's got to be some grounding somewhere and something that matters to you and some sense of commitment to something. You just don't get up in the morning and write a new philosophy every day. So I want to hopefully be really clear about that, because I think that we live in a time where, you know, I don't like this, so I'll just make up this and I'll just go be this way. And that's good enough because everybody's idea is as good as everybody else's. That's not true. You know, somebody who wants to lock up little kids at the border, that idea is not as good as somebody who says that's really a pity. We shouldn't be doing that. And if you can't discern that, then you've got a real big problem that you have to work on. So I don't split this up into spiritual or not spiritual. It is life. You know, it is life. Life is about all kinds of paradoxical pieces of information, things that are equal in value and need to be honored, that have to be navigated with integrity and have to stand the test of being something that has integrity, and not just this is the dress I want to wear today and I don't like it tomorrow, so I get another one. That's not it.
Powerful.
And some of the tenor of some of the questions reminds me to say that embracing paradox, it can stay an intellectual pursuit. But when Parker Palmer goes beyond that to say, are we willing to stand in the tragic gap because we are learning to embrace paradox? Now that takes it to a totally different level for me. Now it's not an intellectual pursuit. Now, this is not something I can do in my log cabin in isolation in a perfectly ordered life. To stand in the tragic gap calls me to embrace both the messiness, often of other people's decisions, and the crazy chaos that we create for ourselves as two-leggeds. But then it's also about standing in the tragic gap because I recognize that things don't have to be this way, and I have a part in standing as a witness to how they can be. That's what I was addressing when I said it's love, it's being in relationship, it's being in community. I don't have everything I need to stand in the tragic gap. I am incomplete. I am a tragic gap myself in my incomplete process of healing. So yes, what does it mean? I need community. I don't need community because I'm lonely. I love being by myself. I need community because spirit shows up in the space between us, and I realize what we can do together far surpasses what we could each do separately, that we are actually called to stand in that tragic gap together. That's what I meant.
Yeah. Wow, thank you for that. Ruth Elizabeth?
Yes, I wanted to share one of my favorite quotes, and it echoes what Catherine was speaking to earlier, and it's by Rabbi Bradley Hirschfield. And the quote is, "I don't believe that you have to be wrong for me to be right." And so it just speaks so directly, at least for me, to living in the paradox. So I just wanted to share that.
Very poignant. Thank you so much for that. The next question is, what could be a first step when a parish seems to be paralyzed with fear? Essentially, what can get the institution off the dime?
I think it was William Temple at the height of the Second World War who claimed that the church is the only human institution that exists primarily for its non-members. And of course, he was arguing against isolationism and so forth, but he goes way beyond that as a theologian to say, churches often forget why they exist. And the way out, and the way I know to answer your question from my everyday experience from the last 30 years is a few of the members have to fall in love with a few of the non-members and then let that relationship mess up everything that keeps them stuck where they are. It's really about that. Without that, all the interventions we can cleverly devise don't really go very far. A few of the members have to fall in love with a few of the non-members and see how that new relationship messes up everything else. I mean, really fall in love, like the kind of mutual affection that has them caring about each other's well-being when they're not together. That kind of connecting, caring about their children, wondering about what they're thinking about when they fall asleep at night, wondering if they need help in any way, calling them and asking, how are you doing? That's a church reclaiming its roots. Everything else, secondary, tertiary. Thanks for asking.
And I would add to that it also needs to go a little further and have some brokenheartedness in it.
Yes.
The capacity the capacity to be brokenhearted for people. I believe, and I just was saying this earlier today in a class on dismantling racism, that until we start having brokenheartedness in that effort to dismantle racism, we're just going to keep on moving the chairs around on the deck of the Titanic or something, some nonsense kind of stuff. And I think the church has totally lost its capacity to be brokenhearted. We work hard not to be brokenhearted. We want to come to church so we can just feel good. And then if we don't, we want to get rid of the folks that didn't make us feel good. Or we think everything's supposed to work well for us because we're good Christians going to church and God's supposed to be on our side and running errands for us. And really God is calling us to be brokenhearted as God, and God is our brokenhearted. So, I want to be willing to be brokenhearted for the people who suffer. And I was just remembering today, a young man who got up and went to the dentist, got his lunch at Subway, came home, and was killed by the police as he was trying to come in his back door. That same day, my son got up and went to the dentist and came home and came in the front door and didn't get killed. I don't know why. Because I'm not any better than that other young man's mother, and neither is my son. But for some reason, it wasn't my son. But it is important for me to be brokenhearted for that woman who lost her son, and I'm still brokenhearted about it. I can't talk about it without crying a little bit, because I just can't. Because I could think about what it would have been like if my son was at the door and I had to open the door to his body and he just went to the dentist. And we're just not willing to let ourselves be brokenhearted enough for the suffering that's in the world and in the people in the world in particular, but Tom, also for the people we know. I mean, it's you don't have to. Maybe you can't bring yourself to be brokenhearted for somebody being in a bum shelter in Syria, but maybe you could get a little bit of capacity to be brokenhearted for somebody living under the bridge that you drive by every day and see them sleeping outdoors. Maybe you could open yourself up to that. So
I really appreciate both of these responses because it really does also speak to the first question about what else does paradox require, or what other, I don't know if I would use the word skills for brokenheartedness, but what else does it require? And so Reverend Brackett so eloquently said love and then brokenheartedness. And so thank you both for sharing that. So profound.
It's not a skill. It's an openness to the spirit. It's an openness to, it's a capacity to be open to discovering who you really are, and what you are really about. And it's about being vulnerable. And I don't think of vulnerability as a skill. I think it's an openness of heart. I think it has to do, it comes back to love. You know, I think love is one of the best catalyst for creating the space for brokenheartedness.
Wow. Just want to sit with that. That was very profound. Thank you. Miriam, you are unmuted.
Okay. Hi, thank you. I will try to be brief. Just wanted to share an experience from my life. Last May, I had the opportunity to spend 2 hours at George Floyd Square. And what Dr. Meeks and Pastor, I'm sorry, I forgot your name. Tom, I'm sorry, Pastor Tom, just what you just said about paradox and many other things really helped me again name what I experienced there. I wrote an article about it, and I called it the beloved community, because what I found there, I found God and I found community and God found me. We hadn't been there very long. Someone asked us if we needed to get a vaccine and would have helped us to do that. There were so many, one man, just my party was white, 3 of us, and one of the people there just started talking to us, and we said, well, we're from Michigan, and he was just like so excited that we were there. And I don't know, he kind of like started dancing. So I just sort of started dancing with him. And I mean, I could go on and on about experiences like that in those 2 hours, but it was like, and so you really now helped me name that was a paradox, because I almost felt a little bit guilty because I'm in this place where this egregious lynching went on, and now I'm finding this incredible community. And they also had an unused gas station with a bonfire in it, and with benches around it. So we sat there and talked to some people, and my minute's probably over, but so thank you for helping me to name that paradox too. But that will be a lifetime experience for me.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for your transparency.
You're welcome.
Dr. Meeks, do we have time for one more, or is that it?
We have 15 more minutes, so we have plenty of time. So
okay. If you all would please place me in the chat if you would like to speak, as well as raise your virtual hand. While you all are doing that, I'm just really meditating on what Reverend Brackett and Dr. Meeks have shared, specifically on the brokenheartedness and the love, because it makes us reframe in a certain way grief and to embrace it if we're going to truly embrace paradox. And so I'm thankful for tonight, because it has provided me, in some senses, a righteous way to lament, and not to see lament as an enemy. So thank you for that.
It's beautiful.
Diana, would you like to say something?
yes, Diana, we would like for you to.
Yes, I'm going to unmute you.
Thank you, Catherine. I have to say, first of all, that I'm also a Catherine Meeks and a Tom Brackett junkie.
You're really in bad shape.
In my life. What I've been hearing in various different ways, which is very affirming to me as a Jungian, is that it's about holding that tension of opposites. And that if we can hold the tension long enough and with enough presence and open-heartedness, transformation does occur, whether it's a new understanding or whether it's a new development, whatever. But we have to be able to identify those opposites, which requires a certain consciousness and intention to be fully present. And for me, that's what it's all about. That's what life is about. Life, death, and the unknown third. You know, there really is nothing else.
Right. Yeah. And one of earlier today, I was working with a group of people on racial healing stuff. And one of the things that I think that happens with people who are oppressed is that we learn how to manage paradox better than people who don't know anything about oppression really, because we are forced to make sense out of stuff that just doesn't add up. And in order to keep ourselves from going completely crazy, we have to find ways to put it in some spaces that make some kind of sense. So, you know, Diana, the Jungians might argue against Jung himself because of his own inability to know about race, might argue about, you know, some poor little Black girl like me in Arkansas not knowing about individuation. But I did know because I had to figure out how to travel in a world that didn't make any sense and make sense out of it. You know,
Exactly.
which is a part of what learning how to navigate the contradictions, the paradoxes is really
I would
about.
also just want to add that holding those opposites, at least being able to identify them, and then holding them consciously with awareness, allows us then to look at the trauma that it has occurred. And it's really not changing the trauma. It's about trying to change, or at least enable, what's underneath the trauma, which is that feeling, those feelings of rejection, of being discounted. And when we can embrace those feelings, it literally enables enough space within us, I believe, to then be able to be fully present to the other.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that. Dr. Black, you are unmuted.
Fantastic. Hello, everyone.
Hello, Dr. Danny.
Hello.
How are you?
Hey. What a joy to see all of you. What a joy to see all of you. The beauty is that this very platform is a kind of paradox, because it seems like every gender, every race or possibility, every age is represented here. And this surely has got to be what heaven is like, right? but there is one thing that I think happened here tonight that's so remarkable that made me want to speak. First of all, Dr. Catherine Meeks is an angel and the joy and the love of my life. So I just have to say that, right?
Oh, my goodness.
Second of all, I'm going to say, Tom, I'm going to tell you why I really have an honor and respect for you. Ever since I was a kid, I have heard so many white people say, you know, my parents were not racist. They did not raise us to be racist. They raised us, you know, to love everyone. That's the house I grew up in. So I could never figure out who the racists were. I could never, ever find them. But racism just proliferated everywhere. But every white person I met always claimed that they were the exceptional household. And I love you, man, for saying, if things went right, I should be racist. That is how we get to racial healing. Because the truth of the matter is, if I'm the descendant of slaves, and I am, somebody's the descendant of the masters too.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So I just really thank you for that honesty.
Yes. Yes.
Profound. Thank you for sharing that.
Well, are there other questions?
Not so far. If there are, please feel free to speak up now.
David Lear asked about whether I would say more about being in community and my need for community. And I would like to name that what I'm still learning, is that for all of us that decide, yes, this is our calling, and that we want to live in community that embraces difference, that stands in that tragic gap. I've learned that this is all heart work. Of course, we're going to use, our minds, education, and behavioral approaches, but it is heart work, and it is frequently uncomfortable. I hate having my heart broken open. I hate being called to places of vulnerability. And yet in the middle of that, this community I'm a part of calls me into holy play. It's holy only because a person like me should never be able to play. I should not know how to play, but something comes over me and it's like spirit calls me to giggle and become as a little child so that I can access this beautiful work. And it's not work. I keep saying work. It's holy play in that I'm being undone. All those strategies, all those outthinking strategies, achieving dominance and so forth by outsmarting, nah, that's earnestness. That's what Jesus is talking about. He says, come take my yoke upon you. Learn my way, because it's light and it's easy. And so children, the care and nurture of children and young people, that's often actually our best guide. I would say that humility is essential, and I need the friction and the messiness of community to keep me in that honest place where this actually happens, where I stop dreaming about it and imagining it and I actually do it. So David, that's how I know to answer that beautiful question that you raised early on. Thank you for asking.
And I think that when churches, when those religious organizations that call themselves churches, I'm not so sure they ought to use that word, but when they do, they need to begin to realize that it's not about the slickest website or the best evangelistic campaign and all this stuff, but that the willingness to be this brokenhearted place where people can come and know, as Howard Thurman says, that they can have refuge in your heart, which is the only place you can find refuge. Yeah. He says, in another person's heart. And that to know that, to create a place where people know that when they come there, that they can find refuge, that they, no matter who they are, what they are, or what they're up against, that there is this loving, kind reception, hospitality that's grounded in really willingness to be brokenhearted and vulnerable, and not just glad to get, you got the best coffee in town. I mean, it's not about any of that nonsense that we've so caught up with. And I would, I've said all the time, I never heard Jesus talk about any kind of campaign to get people to come and be with him. But he was always trying to get away from people, because everywhere he went, there was somebody wanting to be with him, because he was able to connect to people in a way that they never forgot. Maya Angelou says that people will forget what you have said to them, but they will never forget how you made them feel. And Jesus made people feel like they were okay. I think, at least that's my understanding of the Jesus that I know about. And you're okay. I don't care who you are. You don't have to be smart. You don't have to be, you don't have to smell good. And those of you who know me know how I am about aromatherapy. So I love for things to smell good, but you don't have to smell good. You don't have to be any of those things. You just are who you are. And I just think we could just change so many things if we could, if we can turn ourselves in that direction. And since I'm not counting on the institutional church doing that anytime soon, I'm just going to keep trying to do it myself. And as Starhawk would say, that's the salvation for the church, because I keep showing up there and being the person who's saying that's who we're supposed to be, and maybe that will help. I don't know. And I quit worrying about it, actually, to some degree. So last words, was there one more person that needed to?
Yes, Judy.
Thank you. I'll try to say real quickly, this has been wonderful for me tonight, so thank you. For me personally, fear gripped my life for so long that the only thing that came through, the only thing that reached out, and it knocked on the door a lot of times for me, was love. But I had a message as a little girl that you didn't really know me. If you really knew me, you wouldn't love me. So I kind of knocked that love down a lot. It took brokenness, total, absolute, complete brokenness at a place in my life that I became vulnerable. And guess what? I landed in a lap of love. and, and I began to have the courage. So everything you all have said tonight resonates with my own personal life. And I know that it's daunting, but I know the power of love. And every time I open myself and connect in love with another person, there is some kind of magic that goes on that's beyond me, that embraces me and the other, and here we go. And so I'm on this journey, and I love everything you all have shared tonight. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Judy. And I just wanted to share very quickly that something that both of our incredible speakers shared made me really think, and I'm probably going to be meditating on this until next week when we get together, but brokenheartedness is the mechanism by which our hearts are enlarged. And that is a contradiction to me, because I would assume that if my heart is shattered in a million pieces, my heart grows, it shrinks, not enlarges. But it's something quite paradoxical and fascinating to consider that my heart is enlarged as the more I'm broken, if I surrender to that. And then finally, I thought about what Reverend Brackett said, in this world you will have trouble. Well, the Bible said that, but that you referred to. But at the same time, Jesus is saying, but come to me because my yoke is easy and my burden is light. What a paradox and an invitation. So thank you.
I call it Jesus's double talk. So, Ed, let's hear Ed, and then we'll have our last words and finish.
Okay, let me unmute.
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Catherine.
Yes, sir.
One argument I would like to make when you're talking about hospitality and that coffee doesn't matter, I would like to say if the hospitality is a door that opens wide to the poorest of the poor and the broken, vulnerable people, like in this city, the thousands and thousands of homeless people, coffee is unbelievably important. And
Yes,
so is the quality of the food. And I just wanted to say that hospitality, Dorothy Day once said, there's nothing too good for the poor. Yeah. And I think that is a wonderful piece about hospitality. Now, I certainly agree with it. It's rich people serving rich people. You know, they drunk so much good coffee anyway, it doesn't really matter. But right. As Dorothy Day would say, and I am a Protestant Catholic worker, quoting Dostoevsky, love in action is harsh and dreadful when compared to love in dreams. Thank you.
And Ed, I was really thinking of us who have all the different kinds of coffee we can imagine. And we're just trying to see if our coffee at this place can be better than the coffee at that place. When it gets to be that, competition. So that's what I meant. I totally agree with you about, and we should be carrying all that fancy coffee to give to the poor anyway, instead of worrying about it for ourselves. So yeah, Tom, I think we have used up the time we allotted, and I want to see what you would like to say first as we close, and then I'll say something, and then we'll ask everybody to come back next week with more open hearts and listening ears.
Sweet. Well, I want to go back to your invitation. We would invite you to listen to your own heart in a different way tonight. I once had a massage therapist who would, after each massage, would say, now you go home, drink lots of water, take it really easy and listen to your body. And I think it's our hope, is that maybe all of us would go find a quiet place and see how spirit might speak to us to try on being half a shade braver, but also, as Divya Shah said, one of the biggest sins is a calcified, hardened heart. How have these words called us to an open, tender heart toward the world that Goddess loves so fiercely? How is my heart being tendered toward this world that God loves so fiercely? Thank you for letting me be with you tonight.
Yeah. I just want to say that every time I'm with any group of people anywhere, my deepest desire is that all of us will be better because we have been together.
Mm-hmm.
And for whatever the reason is that we're together, that we ought not to be the same people who came on this screen as we leave the screen.
Yes.
And we should not be the same people next week when we gather and leave again. So if we're not growing, then we're probably dying. And it's probably a good idea to check into that and see if that's how you really want to walk through the world. And I always stay deeply grateful to find people who care enough to take time to pay attention to these kinds of issues, the issues of the heart. I think that head is important, but if I had to choose, I'd take my heart rather than my head if I had to choose. And thank God I don't have to choose. So I'm just so glad to have you come in and be here with us tonight, and so much look forward to next week and then 1 week after that. And this book is out of print, but you can find it if you are diligent in your search. And I would encourage you to find it if you can and read it, because it is worth the effort. It very much is. So it's wonderful to be with you and to see so many people that I knew already, and then to see all of the new faces, and especially that person from Australia who found us all the way across the whatever, I don't know, Australia is at the end of the world, I think, actually, but you probably don't think so if you live there. So is it you, Mr. Shaw? No, okay.
Yes.
Anyway,
I just
it is.
Okay.
Hi, sorry, Dr. Meeks. Yes, it's me, Divyesh. I love what I'm hearing. I'm just grateful for the presence of all of you and Tom. And Australia is Australia. As you say, we're here, but it doesn't make me far from you.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It doesn't. It's a short journey between souls, right? Yeah. So we wish you many wonderful dreams, and we hope and pray that your dreams bring you wonderful messages that you may not be able to hear if you were not asleep and dreaming, and that you will pay attention to those, and that you will pay attention to all of the ways in which God and the Goddess speak to you. And don't discount anything. Whatever is on your path deserves attention, whatever it is. So may you be really blessed and kept well until I see you next week. Thank you, Dominique, and thank you all.
Sure.
Good night.
Good night.
Good.